And as you can see at the moment, we have fairly good consensus that yes, this vision is still very much where we need to be. So that's nice to get that feedback. I'll let that keep running in the background, so please keep sending through your thoughts there. But it sounds like we are still on the right track with our vision, so great to get that reaffirmed this afternoon. Now, last message again here, if you'd like to join us for a workshop this afternoon, please sign up now. We just need a little bit of time so we can get you allocated to your appropriate workshops. We're now going to move on to one of our BQMAC members, Maxine Whittaker. She's the Dean of the College of Public Health, Medical and Veterinary Sciences and co-director of the WHO Collaborating Centre for Vector-Borne and Neglected Tropical Diseases at James Cook University. Maxine has an extensive career that is quite incredible, and I'll throw that for you in the chat in just a moment. Her wealth of experience in the area of behavioural science is exceptional, and we're really fortunate to have her as one of our Queensland Biosecurity partners and to share with us the key behavioural insights she's gleaned and how these relate to our Queensland Biosecurity system. Good afternoon, Maxine.
Good afternoon, and hopefully my PowerPoint is just loading after the tutoring you gave me recently.
Looks like it's, yeah, there we go, we've got that now.
Okay. All right, fantastic, and thank you very much, and I thank the Director General also for his segue into my topics. So before I start, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and seas on which all of us are working and joining today. Pay my respect to traditional owners past, present, emerging, and those who are present on this forum. I'm on the land of the Kabi people today. So what I'm going to do today is just quickly go through a linkage between a selection of behaviour change theories, and it's not going to be a very theoretical thing, but a collection of those, and linking it to a document, some work that the department did in 2020-2021, which was called What are Queenslanders' Level of Awareness, Attitudes, Beliefs, Intentions and Behaviours Towards Biosecurity. So I'm trying to join those two, and hopefully that will help you think about particularly the issues that we're going to measure against tomorrow around partnership principles, around mutual trust and respect, around actually clarifying roles and responsibilities, and then also empowering people. There are a lot of behaviour change theories, and again, I'm not going through all of these, but what I want this to illustrate is just that human behaviour is very, very complicated, as many speakers have talked about, and no one person basically is the same. And one of the things these various theories make us think about is how we have to actually segment the audience, break the audience that we're trying to focus on into different parts, and realise that they may need different strategies at different times. There may be other forces that are making them change their behaviours or influencing their behaviours. And it's a constant process of learning, evaluating, seeing what's working or not working and for whom, and redress that. And often you go back to the theories to try to think about how you may be able to influence a particular group of people who may not be changing to the behaviour that you desire, or maybe actually reverting to past behaviours. So just as a start, and I see that you've got my notes pages too, so I just need to try to get rid of those. Hide presenters view, there we go. What the document found is in general public, about 52% of the general public have actually engaged in at least one risky behaviour from a biosecurity point of view in the last year, and about 73% of farmers, and these farmers included large scale, small scale crops as well as animal production. The 73% had engaged in at least one risky biosecurity behaviour. But as you'll see as I pull up some of the other data they had, you'll also see that there was a really great willingness of people, both farmers and general public, to engage in biosecurity. So that's the good news, but obviously people are actually not sure of what biosecurity is when it comes to their actions. The first theory I want to talk about is the stages of change model. And again, basically, I think the diagram says it all, that you have to move people from maybe not even thinking about biosecurity, what's called pre-contemplation, to start contemplating it, move that contemplation into preparing and then taking action. Then you've got to maintain that behaviour, that desired behaviour, because sometimes people relapse. And I'm sure if any of you think of something you've tried to change in your own life, some behaviour, you know exactly what this cycle feels like. So what do we know from the data? What we know from the general public is that 70% had heard of the term biosecurity, so at least they knew about it, but 30% said they weren't sure, they didn't know about what their roles and responsibilities were as an individual. When you look at what they thought biosecurity was, though, you'll see 57% of them actually thought of it as something coming from outside Australia into Australia. So you might understand why they weren't sure what their roles were. And you'll see that some of the things many of us talk about as biosecurity were not things that people themselves automatically considered as that. Only 8%, not surprisingly, had heard about the term general biosecurity obligations, but they perceived it as very important. And 11% had heard that every Queenslander can pay their part. But again, 82% said they would accept that personal responsibility. So we've got fertile ground there, but there's still quite a gap. From a farmer's point of view, 100%, again, probably not surprising, had heard the term of biosecurity. In my slides, when I put a little star, I'm suggesting areas of where we might want to take action. And a red cross means this is something a problem that we might need to address. So you can see that what biosecurity meant were things more broadly about what we call biosecurity, stopping disease in animals, in crops and plants. And I think particularly important, people thinking about protecting their livelihoods, their properties, and protecting Australia. They're good visions to draw upon. A lot, though, see biosecurity as meaning paperwork. And I think we have to be careful about that too when we think about how we implement many of our activities. 35% had heard about the general biosecurity obligations. 39% remember reading them, but again, really high perceptions of its importance and their personal responsibility. Another theory to think about is what's called community level structural models. And with this little graph, I'm trying to just illustrate that model, that independent along the bottom line of what people's knowledge and skills are, say in developing on-farm biosecurity plans, if people have support available very readily, they're more likely to have actually developed and used a biosecurity plan. Whereas if it's only available on request, they've got to work hard to get it, they're less likely, even though these people all have the same level of knowledge and skills. So what did the data show? From a general public, 43% weren't even sure what they needed to know or to do. And if you see here, these are areas all for action. They couldn't identify potential biosecurity issues. A low number knew how to respond, a low number knew how to manage, and a low number knew how to prevent future biosecurity risks. So a bit of work there in the general public. From a farmer's point of view, it was different. You had higher levels of knowledge and ability, a little bit drop off though when it came to knowing how to prevent future biosecurity issues. So something that we may still need to work on. Another model is the cognitive. Now I come from a human health background, but have worked in animal-human ecosystem interfaces for quite a few years now. But the health belief model obviously is from a human health point of view, but I think really relevant for here. Because it says the likelihood of somebody on the right-hand side doing the behaviour you want depends on a range of things. It depends on demographic variables, but also depends upon their perceptions of their susceptibility, the severity of the outcomes, the costs of doing something, the benefits of that behaviour, what might actually be a cue for them to take some action. That often might be from who do they hear things, or what might be happening in their surroundings to make them think about, contemplate acting. what their motivation is to be biosecure in our case, and how much control, how much efficacy do they think they themselves have to make a difference. So what did our data show? From a general public point of view, it found that many people thought that something should be done about people who put biosecurity at risk. Quite a few agreed that biosecurity was personally important. Sorry, that should be 67%. But a quarter almost, a fifth, said that it's not their responsibility. And there were quite a few people, again a fifth, who thought, well, I've seen people do things wrong and nothing's happened to them. So again, some things to think about from an action point of view. From a farmer's point of view, again, quite high agreements with statements that this is a risk for them. But you'll see, again, the thought of having to quarantine my farm terrifies me. And Patrick Bell, the opening, talked about that case we heard yesterday on the Fenwick farms and what happened because they did deal with biosecurity. Those sorts of things often may be a disincentive for people to do things. That was about 79% had that terror. You'll see that there are many people, 59%, felt that they had not seen a serious biosecurity risk in their local area, so didn't perceive it as a risk. And then you see about a quarter said that what I do doesn't impact on Queensland's biosecurity, and I'm not sure of the impact on our community if I put biosecurity at risk. So some areas for work. The consequences from a general public's point of view, again, I think a positive thing for us to work with is that 67% said they would be devastated if they weren't able to engage in at least one activity that they like to do that would be threatened by biosecurity. And they saw this as things where, where I live, how much does that actually risk me causing a biosecurity problem? And again, quite half of people said where I live, there's no risk. So something we have to think about. Less than half felt that they didn't really have, I'm not sure of the impact on my community, etc. You can see the numbers down there. So all of these areas, again, we have to increase people's perception of risks and consequences to be able to change their behaviours. From a farmer's point of view, what's important to farmers, you'll see there only 16% put biosecurity as one of the important threats. You'll see surviving the drought, again, not surprisingly, staying afloat financially and caring for my stock and my future were far higher. So linking biosecurity threats to how it may impact upon some of these other things that they have higher value placed on is probably a really good way to take messaging. Remember, 73% said they had engaged in at least one risky biosecurity behaviour. And again, in the challenges to farmers, biosecurity threats was only seen by 2% as being a challenge. Again, a lot of things were higher than that. So again, we have to think about how we put these messages in what people perceive as important. The social expectation model is another model. Again, I'm using the same areas about whether they knew and have skills in developing biosecurity farm plans, but look at whether their social network. If more than 50% of their social network are using a plan, they're far more likely to do so. Whereas if less than 25% are using plans, they're less likely to do so, even if they have the same knowledge and skills. And the individual structural model may also show you that there might be other things in their environment, in their own individual context, that's going to impact upon whether they change their behaviours and maintain that change. For example, maybe, are they a high-income farm or a poorly performing farm? So context does matter in trying to really nuance the messages to be able to increase the potential of supporting a behaviour change. So our data showed in motivation, very high motivation to protect Australia's environment now by the general public, to protect that environment for the future and to preserve our way of life. What the yellow circle down below is also just to show you where there's some problem areas. About only 40%, 30% said that they actually didn't have a personal obligation to protect Queensland's biosecurity. And the message we often use of Australia being a clean and green country didn't necessarily gel with quite a few percentage of the people. The general public, quite a few thought they could follow requirements if they knew what to do and recommendations. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. But there was quite a large percentage who said, I don't hear much about the risks. I don't clearly understand the types of things that I need to do or that I do that put Queensland at risk. And I don't know what I'd do to reduce that risk. So obviously they don't feel like they've got that power, that efficacy to make a difference. And again, some problem areas here around whether it would cost them money, they're less likely to do something, and I just don't have the time to do something. So again, we need to think about that as we try to support people to be biosecure aware. From a farmer's point of view, again, really high understanding of every person playing a role and that every farm makes a difference and that it's important. But when we come down again to that idea about the thought of quarantining terrifies me, that I haven't actually heard of risks in my area. As an individual farmer, what I do doesn't impact on Queensland's biosecurity. Yeah, there was a quarter who's agreed with that statement. What I do doesn't matter. And I'm not sure of its impact. So again, areas where we have to look at our messaging and our support. The risks, many saw very high risks, but not hearing of a severe biosecurity risk in our local area actually makes a difference on whether they actually perceive it as a risk to they themselves. The social learning and social cognitive theories talk very much about this concept again about self-efficacy, a belief in an ability to actually do what is being asked to be done. And also, and so again, we've talked a bit about self-efficacy and I've highlighted some of those issues, particularly amongst the farmers not knowing, quite a few of them not knowing what to do to reduce biosecurity risk. Although large percentages of the general public and farmers said, just tell me what to do, tell me what the recommendations are, and I'll do it. So there's a really willingness, they're contemplating it, preparing to take action, but aren't sure how to take that next step. And they agree. What's interesting, I think, in the farmers' statements was also who they think really are the problems. So a lot of farmers thought that hobby farmers were more of a problem for biosecurity than me, that where I live means my risk of causing biosecurity is very low. The biosecurity risks for my property, for my farm, are very low because of the farm I have. If there was a risk, then we would be told by the Queensland government. It's hard to control other people's vehicles and other people coming onto my farm. They don't like the paperwork to do with biosecurity. And there are many risks to biosecurity that are outside my control. So you can get this feeling that they don't necessarily feel efficacious. So moving on, I'll just skip that one. I talked about segmentation of audience. So here what we had in this group were a lot of different socioeconomic groups, a lot of geographic segmentation, which included also differences between Southeast Queensland and the rest of the public, different types of behavioural types of people and different psychometrics of people. And there were also differences seen between horticulture, high animal production and low animal production intensity, large scale, small scale and generational farmers. And so they segmented the Queensland residents into these types of groups of people, and you can see there were different engagement approaches therefore recommended for different types of people. And also they segmented farmers in a similar way and identified that we needed different engagement approaches for different farmer segments. And the last thing to talk about is the positioning. What is the product and how do we market it to appeal to people? And again, what's a good news story is that Biosecurity Queensland by the general public was seen as very, very credible, as was customs and fisheries, agriculture and fisheries, And then you'll see with the little shaking hands that they're the other partners that seem to have really high credibility for us to think about in messaging to the general public. And similarly with the farmers, the same high credibility, a little bit less than the general public, but a range of partners also that they see as credible partners to be part of our messaging and behaviour change. So we do need to think about a whole range of things: marketing, legislation, service provision, regulation, and maybe financial and incentives and disincentives. And for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations, also there are other perspectives of well-being and connectedness to land that we need to take into account. So in summary, we're talking around a whole range of partnerships that can help encourage community actions, that help develop personal skills of farmers and general public, that create the supportive environments for change, that we have public policy that supports biosecurity, and that we have biosecurity services that are orientated to support people to change, maintain, and not fall backwards on their biosecurity actions. Thank you.
Thanks, Maxine. What an incredible start today to be able to go through those behavioural drivers of Queenslanders and Queensland farmers, getting that all unpacked and giving us a solid understanding for how we can move